We often talk about the divisions between traditional progressive metal and the modern approach. We also often mention the preference for something more traditional, although we can be surprised by modern formulas that become quite captivating. Kingcrow are one of the few cases where they have a bit of both. There's a traditional ambience here, closer to progressive rock or even art rock, but then there are modern elements and arrangements that, rather than being a cynical attempt to sound current, elevate the songs to a high level of quality, which is the conclusion that solidifies with each listen. Classic progressive metal is what the Swedes Paralydium present on their second album. More than just a project by members and ex-members of Dynasty, Universe Calls proves that Paralydium should be considered a real force in the style. Although their style is more traditional than what is more common today, and with a very Scandinavian approach, the class they exude throughout this album is impressive and captivating. Dissonant metallic juggernaut, that's what Teeth have to show on their third album. More specifically, death metal, which the Los Angeles band has definitely embraced. They've also embraced greater consistency in their songwriting, which makes this an album you're swallowed up in, as if it were an organic abyss that's endless. This gives it an unexpected dynamic compared to the expected one-dimensionality. The Americans' Oxygen Destroyer are back for their third album, which is a veritable hurricane of chaos and metallic destruction. With thrash metal as a base and more primitive black and death metal as a guide, this little more than half an hour of music is a bomb that fires in all directions and takes everything in its stride. One-dimensional but far from uninteresting, this is an album for those who like their extreme music fast and violent. After the EP of the same name in 2022, 2 years later the Greeks are back with their debut album. An album guaranteed to excite any death thrash metal fan, without breaking barriers into uncharted territory. The greatest asset of Attack of the Zombie Cans is how it manages to bring enthusiasm to something that supposedly, at least for the most cynical, no longer has any secrets whatsoever. And the enjoyment it brings increases with each listen. Eight years later, here's the second album by Chile's Mourner's Lament, who bring us their doom metal, almost bordering on funeral doom, very depressing but also beautiful, enveloping the listener in a melancholy blanket that you can't do without. This isn't music you listen to every day, but when the time is right, it will be an unforgettable journey. This American duo's debut album impressed us positively. Aggressive, burly black metal that takes everything in its stride. Reminiscent of the power of Meloshesh, but without that ethnic flavor, although there is a slight hint of folk. Very slight. With the more epic songs taking center stage on the album, especially the title track. This journey through more virtuosic black metal is a fruitful one, especially for those who think that the style no longer has anything interesting to offer. Thermality are a new force in Swedish melodic death metal. They sound exactly like that, and the references to In Flames and At the Gates in the press release are not unreasonable. This could pinch the interest of those looking for something extremely original, or at least the illusion of originality. Far from sounding dated, The Final Hours is an album that sounds classic, with a focus on presenting songs that are full of hooks and that are memorable. For those who didn't know them, this second album will make fans of classic melodic death metal turn their attention to them. And rightly so. Debut album from Portuguese Phenocryst. Cremation Pyre was highly anticipated in the underground and will not disappoint all high expectations. Raw and somewhat primitive death metal, or at least referring to the most primitive references, but far from crude. Far from it. The dynamics they present show exactly the opposite, making this album an urgent and obligatory discovery for all fans of the style. One of the biggest, best underground debuts of 2024. Has it really been 8 years since the previous Anciients album? We've known there was a void inside us for the last few years, but it seems that it was simply because we were longing for a third album from the Canadians. This album has the power to fill that and any other void. A musical journey that makes you think of Opeth but doesn't just capture the Swedes' past glory. It makes us think of the balance between a progressive soul and where heaviness comes in to give it even more relevance. And the heaviness doesn't often appear in comparison, but when it does, it makes a difference and makes the dynamics much more interesting. What a comeback, and what an album.